Chapter 15, Supporting and Organizing Your Speech. In this chapter, we'll look at the major types of supporting material that you may be using and provide an example of each one of those. We'll talk a little bit about how your main points can be developed. We'll explain the three major patterns of organization that you may choose from, that you will choose from to present your speech. We'll talk about effective introductions, conclusions, and a little bit about transitions within your speech. And then finally, we'll explain the purpose of and the differences between your preparation outline or outlines and your final presentation outline. So this is where we are in the 10 steps of creating your speech. We're at the point where you're collecting your supporting materials, you're doing your research, you're collecting your materials, you're developing your main points, you're finalizing your main points and the information that is going to be contained within each of those main points. So basically we're organizing your speech. And then finally, after you have the body of your speech organized and you have all of your support materials and your sources noted, you will construct the introduction, conclusion, and conclusion. So your main points are your key ideas in your speech, and your informative speech in this class, because it's a fairly short speech, should probably include between 2 and 4 main points, no more than probably 4 main points. So let's look at how you might develop or come up with these main points. And this is also in the book in this chapter, in chapter 15. So let's take as an example a very simple thesis statement. A college education is valuable. So to start out and try to come up with some main points that'll get you going on your research, you might ask yourself, why is this valuable? Because you're going to be showing the audience why this is valuable. This is your total speech, your thesis. You're going to cover your thesis. So let's just say you brainstorm, you come up with you could come up with a lot of possible main points. But here's a few. It helps you get a better job, it increases your earning potential, gives you greater job mobility, helps you understand the world, helps you appreciate the arts, and you could come up with many more. Let's say these are the 8 points that you've come up with. So if you look at these, you'll see that some of them are really close, and they probably wouldn't stand, each one of these 8 wouldn't really stand on their own as a main point. They're very close, some of them, to each other. So you can consolidate these. Let's look at these first 3. You could consolidate those into one main point. It helps you get a better job, increases earning potential, gives you greater job mobility. So those all have to do with career. So your first main point could have to do with career. You could improve your career prospects, something like that as your first main point. You could also group these next 3. Helps you understand different cultures, helps you understand the world, helps you appreciate the arts. Those could all be part of probably helping you understand the world. And then the last 2 would certainly go together. Helps you meet new people and make new friends, helps you increase personal effectiveness. In fact, this one you could even segue. You could have as your second main point something to do with increasing your knowledge of people, meeting new people, that kind of thing. And you could kind of segue into the third main point about different cultures, understanding the world, something like that. There are a lot of methods you can use in developing your main points. And the best idea is to use a variety of these. Don't rely just on one or two, but to use a variety makes it most interesting for the audience. And actually, when you're doing your research, you're probably going to come up with some of each of these, really. Examples, narratives, analogies, definitions, testimony, statistics, and finally, of course, presentation aids. Now, these support materials, all of them support your main points. You want to prove to the audience that your main point, you want to give examples, you want to give stories, you want to support them, basically. We do this all the time, so in our own conversation. So here are a few ways to support your speech. Examples. This is specific cases that you find. This might represent a group of people, ideas, experiences, and remember to state your source. We'll get to verbal citations in a moment, but examples are one way to reinforce your points. Narratives. People like stories. People like little stories about individuals or real life experiences that you might find that help you illustrate what you're trying to say. But do keep them somewhat short because you remember you only have a few minutes for your speech. But narratives can really engage the audience. Definitions are important because sometimes you'll have a term or a concept, and remember you have to be thinking about your audience. Will your audience know what this word or term or concept means? Not only will they know, but will they all agree on it? Will they all agree on what the definition is? So often within a speech, it's important to give a definition. Now, there are different types of definitions. You might give a definition by authority. You might give a dictionary definition. Wherever you get your definition, you want to definitely cite that source within your speech. But you want to be sure that you and your audience are all on the same page with your meaning. Using an analogy can be useful at times. Very often, they're useful in comparing something that you are introducing as a new concept to the audience, and an analogy might be a way of relating it to something that you're sure they already know. You do have to be careful that your audience, and have a good idea that your audience will agree with your analogy and really understand the concept that you're trying to build. Testimonies are opinions or accounts from either experts or eyewitnesses. Say, for instance, you're talking about tornadoes. An expert testimony might come from a person who's an authority in the field, a meteorologist, for instance, whereas what we know as a peer testimony might come from an average citizen who experienced a tornado. Testimonies can be engaging for an audience as well. Statistics are a really common form of supporting material. Now, statistics can be very dry, so you want to be careful and not rely solely on statistics. They also can be incredibly distorted, so be sure that you trust the source you get your statistics from, and you want to be sure to cite your source for your audience. And think about your audience. Will this be a believable, a credible source for the audience as well? A few more points about statistics. There are some rules to use to think about when you do use statistics in your speech. It's fine to round your numbers. It's much easier to remember for the audience to remember 90% than it is to remember 88.9423%. It's okay to round to the nearest percentage. You have to consider the source. Remember, statistics can be distorted, and it's good to know the bias of the source and maybe even get a second source that corroborates those numbers. And once again, use them in moderation. People can only really absorb and remember a few numbers. Your presentation aids are important. People like visuals, and it can be very helpful to you when you're trying to show comparisons or show statistics relating to the audience in any way. And our text discusses some different types of presentation aids. In this class, you'll be asked to use a presentation slide software, PowerPoint, Prezi, whatever you would like to use. Here's a little advice for using presentation aids, and these are from my own experience as well as from the textbook. You want to practice with them when you are practicing your speech. It will make you more comfortable with using them. I always caution against using the slide timer. I think it's more comfortable generally for students to click to the next slide. We can talk more about that if you'd like to on a one-to-one basis. Be sure that they work with the technology in our classroom. And I always recommend to save your presentation in more than one place. Sure, you might have it on a flash drive or you might have it in Google Docs, but try to save it in more than one place, just to be on the safe side. You want to try to, as much as you can, talk to your audience rather than staring at your presentation aid for the entire time. Have your speech, or rather have your presentation slides organized in the way that you will be referring to them during your speech. This is why, again, it's so important to practice your speech with your presentation aid. In your outline, the introduction, the body, and the conclusion are three separate units. So if you look in the textbook, and also I'll have some handouts that I'll provide on JetNet and probably in class too. Introduction will be Roman numeral 1, ideally. Body will be Roman numeral 2, and conclusion will be Roman numeral 3. I'd like you to use the symbols as they're shown in the textbook. So you'll be using Roman numerals, capital letters, numbers, and lowercase letters. There are some really good outline examples right in the textbook. Now, that preparation outline, this is really the bones of your speech. And you'll start with a draft outline, very basic, and then you'll flesh it out as you do more research and fit in more information. So you'll build your outline as you plan what you're going to include. The purpose of an outline is to keep your thoughts organized because you want to come up with an end product that is easy to understand for the audience. So you want to stay organized, and that's why an outline is such a great way to prepare your speech. So this is how the textbook describes the progression. Your preparation outline is the bare bones of the speech. And then you add more subpoints. And then finally, your phrase, keyword, presentation outline, you'll have the main points, the subpoints, the details of your finished speech. That will be your final outline. And your final outline really shouldn't have complete sentences, should have phrases, main points. I'm sure we'll be talking more about that in class. Credibility. I can't stress this enough. So important. we'll be spending more time face to face on talking about the importance of credibility and how to guarantee credibility of the sources you use. Now, I'm going to require that you verbally cite your sources in your speech. And there are easy ways to do this. Pages 206 and 207 in the text give you some really easy ways to do the wording for your verbal citations. Let's look at three different ways that informative speeches can be organized, and think about which way is the most appropriate for your topic and thesis statement. One organization method is the temporal pattern, and this begins with the past and works up to the present. If you're doing something, for instance, on the history of basketball in the United States, that would be best served by using the temporal pattern, starting at the beginning and working to the present. A second type of organization is the spatial pattern. If you're dealing with, say, for instance, the structure of an airplane, you'd want to work from front to back, up to down, that type of thing. Topical pattern. This is for a topic that easily divides into subdivisions, and many of you will be covering topics that lend themselves to the topical pattern. The problem solution pattern is one that is especially useful for persuasive speeches. So we won't go into any detail on that right now. Once you have the body of your speech organized, you've gathered your research, you have an idea of, well, you know everything you want to cover in the body of the speech, then, and not before then, do you want to create the introduction and conclusion. Why do you think you want to wait until you've done the body of the speech? Well, you know for certain what you're going to include in the speech, and you can draw from that to create your introduction and conclusion. So wait until you've got your research done, you've got the bulk of the speech completed, and you know what you want to include before you concentrate on your introduction and your conclusion. The introduction to your speech is a really important part of it. There are three purposes to the introduction. Certainly to gain the attention of your audience, to establish some type of relationship between you, your topic, and the audience, and then very importantly also to let your audience know what's coming. Now, how do you think you're going to let your audience know what is coming in the introduction? By the thesis. You definitely want to state your thesis within the introduction. So there are many ways to get the attention of your audience. The textbook names several, gives you quite a few ideas. One thing that I can surely tell you I do not want to hear you do is to start with, I'm going to do my speech on blah, blah, blah. Oh, that is so boring. Please don't do that. Some of my students' favorite ways to gain attention are to ask a question. And I mean ask a question of the audience right out of the gate. Very first thing, look at the audience, ask them the question, even wait for an answer or two. Another way is to just go right into a story, short story, that relates to your topic. Another popular way is to use a quotation that applies in some way to your topic. And any of these methods of gaining attention should be used as the first words out of your mouth. Another goal that you have within your introduction is to establish some kind of speaker-audience topic relationship. Now, you don't have to spend a lot of time or a lot of words doing this. It's just this time to show your interest in the topic, your enthusiasm, perhaps even state, I've had a lot of experience with this, or a story about how you've been involved. There are a lot of ways you can do this. You want to also let them know the information relates to them. You want to give them a reason for listening. And sometimes just establishing your enthusiasm is enough to get them interested. The conclusion should do three things. It should summarize very briefly what you've just spoken about. It should provide closure. So you definitely don't want to stop at the end and say, oh, I guess I'm done, or that's all I've got. I don't want to hear that from you. Come up with a thoughtful closing statement that will remember in a positive way that kind of sums up everything you've said. I skipped over motivate because that really is what you want to include in a persuasive speech. We'll be talking more about that later. But for the time being, with your informative speeches, just kind of summarize what you spoke about and provide some closure. So just to wrap it up, with your introduction, you definitely want to get their attention from the first words out of your mouth. You want to create a little bit of a feeling of rapport, a little connection with the audience, and you definitely want to state your thesis within the introduction. And then in the conclusion, you just want to sum up what you've said, just kind of bring it all to a nice final package of what you've said. Transitions now, just a bit about this. These are words we use to help the audience follow as we move from one main point to the next, one point to the next. Some examples of this, and we create these words, these phrases, without even thinking sometimes. So you might say things in your translation like, so with that in mind, let's now talk about, or however, or now let's take a look at, or next I'm going to tell you about this. So there are a lot of different words you can use for your transitions.